Are Ukrainian forces continuing to hold Bakhmut despite the threat of encirclement? What is the plan if they choose to withdraw? And is Russia being mum about the saboteurs in Bryansk? What does that mean? I'm going to be breaking it all down. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's March 4th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first, when we look at the control map, there's actually only minor updates, which is itself fairly interesting given the continued efforts by Russia to encircle Bakhmut. You can see they've made steady progress in the last couple of days, putting a lot of pressure on the city itself, but the two major or at least one of the two major roadways leaving the city remain clear. There's also this secondary route here that will enable them again to link up with H3 and get to Chasiv Yar. So not necessarily a crisis yet by any stretch of the imagination. You can also see here, this road may or may not still be clear. It's listed as, if not contested, then at least an area of Russian activity. So to me, this says that it's probably not operational. It's within, looks like about less than a kilometer of Russian lines. So probably this is considered off limits for anything other than vehicles resupplying the troops in contact along this line. When we look at the combat map, you guys can see the activity level of Russian forces is pretty tremendous, especially in Donetsk. That's sort of the biggest surprise, is that there's a ton of activity around Avdiivka, as well as to the south here along this three-pronged advance they've continually been trying to make, but this has just not resulted in very much progress. The only measurable progress, and you can see here they've also been pushing in Kremina, Bilohorivka. Again, they're really quadrupling down on the only place where there is real potential for Russian forces to make a meaningful gain, and that is in Bakhmut. And you can see them really focusing on this encirclement. They may believe they can encircle Bakhmut. It's not clear that they would be able to try to cut it off necessarily. It would involve crossing open ground, but instead, it's their only goal really is to try to cut off H32 and this roadway here to the north, 506. And if they can cut those two off, then they'll prevent at least a large portion of the forces in Bakhmut from withdrawing. Again, I think Ukraine is conducting a controlled withdrawal from Bakhmut while maintaining contact. Some are Institute for the Study of War is out here arguing that it's still a decision of choice, that they may abandon parts of the city. They may, for example, withdraw out from the eastern portion here across the Bakhmutka. That there's a lot of options to phase through this withdrawal from Bakhmut. I still maintain Russian forces should be pinned in Bakhmut as much as possible for as long as possible. And that may be what we're seeing here. Ukrainian forces just pinning as many Russians in Bakhmut as possible, with the idea that they have to keep those forces locked in place while an offensive is gathered elsewhere. Here's what's weird, though. Bryansk Oblast, there was, of course, the Ukrainian saboteurs who claimed they were the Freedom of Russia Legion, and I argued that it was probably fake. It just, the equipment didn't seem right. None of it seemed correct. But what's weird is that I really thought that it was going to be used as a pretext to expand the war domestically, to motivate Russians to see Ukraine as an existential threat or a threat to the average Russian. But many of the things that you would expect Russia to do following those events, Russia hasn't done. For example, now they're claiming that the Russian National Guard ran over a mine while clearing the area. 4 personnel sustained minor injuries. But then, and Russia claims the perpetrators mined the area before leaving. This is a pretty classic, again, a classic insurgent IED type of tactic where they know routes that a response vehicle is going to take, and they emplace an IED to take it out. FSB then released footage of the aftermath, but it shows civilian cars with damage from bullet holes, deceased drivers, as well as man-portable military equipment and mines. So not clear what that's supposed to be, if that's supposed to be the saboteur teams or the or their victims. They said there's not really any identifying information. The head of the Russian Volunteer Corps claimed the responsibility for the incursion and said that Ukrainian officials greenlit the incursion. But what's weird is a Russian investigative committee did not corroborate the Volunteer Corps' claim and instead announced its investigation into the actions of Ukrainian saboteurs, which usually you would want a single, cohesive, easy to understand narrative for people to lock into that'll help them understand in clear terms the threat that's being presented to them. Russian officials and mill bloggers are also claiming Western states were directly involved in the incursion somehow. Claims that they were used NATO-provided weapons. This is the sort of thing we would actually expect from them to say. And an RT Amplified claims that they're affiliated with the Azov Regiment and accuse the UK of involvement. This is, and also, but most notable, most strange and interesting, Russian President Vladimir Putin didn't say anything about it at all, which is extremely interesting because Russian sources widely claimed Putin held the meeting to discuss anti-terror security measures in response to the Bryansk incident, but the readout of the meeting instead recycled a number of Kremlin talking points, no new objectives, and no new means for the Russian military operation in Ukraine. Pretty weird that, you if it is propaganda, then it's would be used as such by the highest authorities to really drive home the importance of the war effort. The fact that they both haven't, and the fact that they are releasing contradictory, tough to understand, very confusing claims about the events, indicate that they don't actually know what's happening. This is like the sinking of the Moskva, right? That's a playbook for when something bad actually happens to Russia. You notice how they said it was like a fire. They said no one was lost. Then there were some casualties. Then it may have been an enemy contact. And so the truth sort of is mushy and remains mushy and confusing. And that's part of the Russian playbook, is to make sure that if someone does get the truth out, that it's simply viewed as one of 50 or 100 different interpretations of what happened. And there's no way to discern what the true sequence of events was. So the fact that Russia has all these, they were NATO, they were Ukrainian, they're Russian, means that maybe there's some truth to it. Maybe it really was a Russian partisan group operating in the area. That would be pretty wild and a pretty stark escalation, or pretty stark. Yeah, I would say, well, escalation's hard, probably escalation, but to see a Russian partisan group operating probably across in the Ukrainian border, and then harassing Russian, in this case, civilians, harassing Russian infrastructure in Russia. Wild stuff. Anyway, guys, that's all I had for you for today. As always, thanks so much to our Colonel and Lieutenant tier patrons. I know I need to update this for this week, but thanks to our Colonel tier patrons: Melissa Janaway, Ted Rockwell, Derek Chang, EC1978, Predator 7R, Judith Haynes, Robin Colburn, all our Lieutenant tier patrons, and all the patrons. If you want access to the uncensored combat video breakdowns, the kind of videos that are viral but YouTube won't let me show, you want to become a member of the Patreon. And they're just supporters. They mean the world to me, because YouTube decides pretty arbitrarily whether or not I get to show what sort of videos I get to show. So anyway, thanks so much. See you guys in the next one.